But first, I guess you'll be wanting some good news at last. And today, we finally got some. The great lockdown of Australia's second biggest state was finally dismantled, or much of it.
Now is the time to open up. Now is the time to congratulate every single Victorian for staying the course. Now is the time to thank every single Victorian family for being guided by the data, the science and the doctors.
This comes after the state registered no new infections over the past 24 hours and no deaths for a week.
I'm very pleased to be able to announce that from 11:59 p.m, Tuesday the 27th of October, all retail will open. Restaurants, hotels, cafés and bars, they will reopen as well. 4 reasons to leave home will be removed.
Yeah, I'll go through some of the details shortly. But all Australians needed this, is not just Victorians. Australia couldn't afford to have Victoria drag us all down when the rest of the country is finally getting itself out of a COVID hole. Here's the head of Treasury's economic modelling team today.
The Victorian situation is having a very, very significant impact across the economy overall and affecting the recovery. It's going backwards while the rest of the country is going forwards.
Now, a lot of Victorians will say, Premier Daniel Andrews, you're a hero. You fixed this. You stood strong and you beat this virus. And the Premier was emotional.
Is this quite emotional for you?
Oh, look, this has been a very difficult year, and Victorians have given a lot.
Now, I do have some sympathy for him. I do. Tremendous pressure. But let us not forget that it is Premier Andrews and his government who caused this disaster in the first place. Let the virus get out of their quarantine hotels, didn't have proper tracing of the infectious, and they didn't properly protect the elderly. Result, another 800 people died and hundreds of thousands of Victorians are out of work. So the Andrews government have only fixed what they broke, and they fixed it in the most brutal way at a horrific cost, this very long shutdown. And their opening, by the way, is far too slow. Restaurants, no matter how big, can still have no more than 20 people inside. But whatever. Thank God we've at least got this. And we now have to resolve that no Australian state can go through this again, bans like these. We cannot blind ourselves to the lessons, because this virus will not go away until and unless there is a vaccine. And no one can be sure when a vaccine will come, and if it does, how good it will be. Although I have to say the industry minister today, the federal one, sounded optimistic.
As a government, we are increasingly optimistic about the prospect of vaccine delivery as early as the first quarter of next year. And health experts have assured us that we are on track to start rolling out the vaccine.
But even if that vaccine does work well, what about the next virus? Are we really going to shut down Australia again? Now, a lot of the lessons we have learned should be obvious. For instance, the Morrison government was too slow to stop international flights, not just from China and Iran, which it did first, but from Europe. And we also need to make more of our own protective equipment and medicines. We were caught short, far too dependent on China and India. We also need far better protection protocols for aged care homes. More than 3/4 of our virus dead died there. That's a disgrace. And contact tracing. Victoria let its own contact tracing system run down and was left with what seems to have been the worst in Australia, working with faxes and paper. In fact, Victoria's infection rates were low enough for the state to reopen weeks ago, but no one trusted these contact tracers to get on top of the outbreaks. That cannot happen again either. And it can't happen again because this is now a very mobile world. We've already seen viruses like SARS and bird flu and Ebola and the Zika virus, the Asian flu, COVID-19, all come out of the third world or the developing world, catching a lift on planes. Who knows what the next one will be like? But all these lessons I've mentioned, there's one that I don't think we will learn because we don't want to learn. We don't even want to talk about it. And the reason I know that is there's an investigation by the Press Council to punish me for even raising it. But we have to look at where and who this virus hit hardest, where it most spread, and learn that multiculturalism, for all that some people love it, and I love some of it too, it does make us more vulnerable. It is not safe for us to have ethnic communities almost disconnected from the rest of us by language and by culture. It's not safe for them, not safe for the rest of us. And I speak as the son of immigrants myself. So I'm not blaming immigrants for this second wave, not at all. Plenty of non-migrants have also caught the virus, brought it in, spread it. We know that. But what I am saying is this virus has exploited a vulnerability, a weakness and a toxic ideology of multiculturalism, and Victoria proves it. Here's just some of the evidence of the problem. In Melbourne, the 6 hotspot suburbs where this second wave took off, all had migrants making up more than a third of the residents. 5 had more than 40% immigrants. 1 had more than 50%. And around Australia, 1 million Australians now say they have poor or no English. And the Ethnic Community Council of Victoria said health messages there were not reaching many people in those suburbs, the hotspot ones. The Andrews government said, well, we've translated health messages into 53 languages, and it still wasn't enough. Some migrants were illiterate even in their own language, or they weren't tuned into Australian media. They could not be reached. And this has been a problem right through this second wave, as the Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, has himself admitted.
On average, the household sizes that we're following up are 2 to 3 times that size. That means more workplaces exposed, and it goes on exponentially. Those workplaces have people working there who have households that are 2 or 3 times the size of an average Victorian household. We are not building up from a trickle of a small number of cases in small households without some of the challenges of casualised work, of cash in hand, of issues of visa status, issues of language and cultural barriers.
Without specifically saying it, Sutton is describing large migrant families. Now, Sutton says some migrant communities, recent migrants, culturally, linguistically diverse communities, they were overrepresented in this second wave. And we've seen that, in fact, from the start. The second wave started when it got through private security guards at Victoria's quarantine hotels, untrained guards that are government COVID coordinators said often had language and cultural barriers. In fact, they were so bad that a nursing agency at the hotel said security staff were even concerned about having to use hand sanitizer, alcohol-based, because it was against their religion. And again, these barriers became a problem, but one that the government didn't like admitting. The virus got out to Melbourne and South East, and the Chief Health Officer had to apologise in both Farsi and in Urdu for revealing it actually spread around 5 Afghan families that had broken social distancing rules too.
I might start with an apology. I know that members of the Afghan community might have felt singled out by statements I made recently. That was absolutely not my intention. Mazarat Mikham or Wabakhay, I apologise.
And as recently as yesterday, the Premier delayed the reopening of Victoria by a day because he wasn't sure that an outbreak involving mostly Muslim families connected with an Islamic college had been contained. Now, that Muslim college actually has got praised for doing so much to nip this outbreak in the bud. And you can actually be sympathetic. I mean, some new migrant communities are poor, they live more hugger-mugger, they can't afford to take a sickie. I understand that. But wherever sympathetic we should be, there is an issue here. We need to bring people together, make sure there are no enclaves, and make sure that English is a common language. But right now it seems that multicultural policies pander to the problem, get in the way of the real solutions. For instance, the Andrews government gave a $44 million contract for hotel quarantine security to Unified Security, which wasn't a preferred tenderer, wasn't in Victoria, wasn't even big, but did claim to be Indigenous owned. This is the boss. And one hotel that this company guarded is responsible for more than 90% of Victoria's second wave infections. The government's multiculturalism is the most extreme in this country, and it directly affected the COVID fight. For instance, a public servant at the quarantine hotels told an inquiry he got 1 hour of training in equity and diversity, none on protective equipment. So, we've had diversity above competence, and that is so today. That is so Victoria. And that's got to end. We've got to learn from this. Victoria has paid The highest price for incompetence. 800 people dead, millions have suffered, and that cannot be allowed to happen again.